We're very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Dr. Henry Lai. Dr. Henry Lai is a research professor at the Department of Bioengineering at the University of Washington. His research interests include the biological effects of electromagnetic fields and cancer treatment using artemisinin and synthetic compounds. Dr. Lai, thank you very much for spending time with us this morning.
Good morning.
Start out and tell us, how did you get involved with the study of electromagnetic radiation?
Okay. Well, it's a long story. I started this type of research in 1980. And at the very beginning, we got funding from the U.S. Navy to look at the radar radiation, which emits electromagnetic fields, particularly microwave type of radiation. And they want to know whether this type of radar have biological effects or even harmful health effects. And so we have been doing that type of research since that time. So it started out with the Navy, and then we got funded by NIH, the National Institutes of Health, to do research.
Continuing on that same line, so you did a study specifically on the effects of microwaves on brain cells, is that right? Can you tell us about that?
Well, that's actually one topics of our research in the last 28 years. And the brain cell study, I think it's more related to the concern of cell phones radiation, whether cell phones can damage cells in the brain and cause cancer. So what we did is that we had rats that we exposed to a very low level of microwave. So it's not a heating effect. It's a very, very low level compared to what we use for cooking. And then we look at the DNA in the cells in the brain of this animal after exposure. And we found that the DNA, there's an increase in DNA breakage or DNA damage in these cells, these brain cells. So that's I guess it's very important finding. And at that time, we were very puzzled by this effect because the radiation is very, very low. And but well, we consistently observe DNA damage. So what are the consequences of DNA damage in cells? There are three outcomes. First is that the cells, well, DNA is very important in cell function. So the cell can not function very well if you have damaged DNAs. And the second is that the DNA may become mutated and may develop, some of the cells in the brain may become cancerous and development of cancer. And the third scenario is that the cell may die if there's too much damage to the DNA. And that could lead to so-called neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer, Parkinson, etc. So, so that's what we found with the brain cells in animals.
And I believe your results found that in the mice that were exposed, there was a 30% increase in the amount of damage versus the control group. Is that right?
Well, it depends on the intensity of the exposure. So, yeah, 30–40%, I think, is about the extent of damage after 45 minutes of exposure. Now, if you prolong the exposure like to 2 hours, you will see bigger damage, even. And now, so you, of course, you ask the question: how is the intensity of the microwave intensity that we use compared to cell phone intensity? When we use a cell phone, 70–80% of the energy that comes out from a cell phone is either absorbed by your hand or your head. So quite a lot of energy is absorbed, 80%. And now you can look at the absorption of energy, for example, in the head of a person when he's using the phone, and do some calculation. At certain part of the brain, the energy absorption is about 8 times more than we use in our experiment.
And I would.
But again, this is not a thermal type of energy, because it's not. When you use a phone, you do not feel the brain heat up. So this is a very low level of radiation that's not causing any increase in temperature.
Would it be similar to would the effects on the human head? Would that be similar to, for instance, in a microwave oven, where you tend to have spots that are hotter than other spots?
Oh yeah, yes. Well, the distribution of energy is not uniform, and it tends to concentrate on a certain area. Yeah, people have this experience when they heat up food in the microwave. You see part of it is hot, part of it is still cold, and so that is kind of the same scenario that you have when you use a phone. The energy tends to concentrate on a certain part of the brain. Now, one thing that's in cell phone use, you always more or less put the cell phone at a certain position relative to your head. So these hot spots, so-called hot spots, are always tend to be at the same area or same volume of the brain. So certain part of the brain get this very high intensity of energy concentration.
So what's the amount of energy that a cell phone can potentially distribute to one's head, and what's the level that you actually tested at?
Well, as I said, that's if you look at certain hot spots in the brain of a cell phone user, the energy can be 8 times more than we use in our study.
All right.
Yeah, in our study, the energy is more uniform, because the animal can move inside the field. So that there's no particular hot spot. The hot spot move around, so average energy will be more uniform inside the body. So when you take the average energy in our rats, it's about 8 times lower than what you can get in the hot spot of when you use a phone.
All right, so you came out with this study, and then where did that get published in journals, or how did that get out to the public?
Yeah, the data were published in peer-reviewed journals. Now, this was the first paper was published in 1995, I think, 13 years ago. And since then, we also did other study related to DNA damage. For example, one thing that come out, I think is very interesting, is that the damage is caused by free radical formation. And you can give animal like the antioxidants. That's why we take antioxidants. If we want to neutralize the free radicals that is produced in our body. Now, if you give antioxidants such as vitamin C, vitamin E, melatonin, which is also a antioxidant, you can block the effect of the microwave.
Interesting. So that do you know about specific amounts of antioxidants that people would need to take to block the microwave?
Oh, you don't need a lot. You don't need a lot. I guess the normal, supplement, I think, is enough. Now, I'm not advocating people taking antioxidants for cell phone use, but this is what we found, that the effect is caused by free radical formation.
So when you came out with your study in '94, what were your peers' reaction to it, and what was the industry reaction to it?
Yeah, at that time, I think that this type of results raised a lot of concern, because at that time, cell phones starting to become popular. That was, and of course, the cell phone industry did not like the results at all. So that's what happened. There was a lot of discussion on, well, is this true or not? And and there are other people who also repeated using, also found the same type of effect, and other people did not find the effect at all. So this is still debatable, I guess, up to date.
Didn't one of the cell phone companies, Motorola, didn't they directly respond to your study?
Well, actually, well, the people from the Motorola company did send some people to our lab and look at what we're doing and things like that. But and well, well, this is there was at that time we did not know what happened, and actually there was an internal memo that leaked out from Motorola, and the memo basically tried to find some way to discredit our results.
As well as other members of the industry, I understand that someone contacted both NIH and perhaps someone else contacted the University of Washington president at the time, trying to get you fired for that?
That's true, yes. Mm-hmm.
So I have to imagine that was that must have been somewhat surprising to you.
Yes, actually, that was actually very stressful too, and it was surprising because we're scientists and we're never involved in all this kind of like political and so it's kind of a very stressful time after we published the paper.
And it wasn't like you were seeking press on this paper or anything. It wasn't like you were doing a press conference saying, look what we found, we want to shut the industry down.
No, we did not do any, well, actually we did not mention the cell phone at all in our paper. But somehow this whole thing just, the publicity actually came from the phone industry. We did not say anything about what would use of cell phone causes effect, causes cancer. We did not say anything about that.
So after that, you have continued to do studies. Did you do any studies that were industry funded or any interactions with the industry after that?
No, we have never gotten in the industry funding, but we got some funding from an organization which is funded by the cell phone industry, and they said well, there's no string attached, and so we did some experiment with them.
Did you have? Didn't you have some experience with the cell phone industry offering some further funding, but there were so many strings attached that you had to say no?
Well, yes, that occurred, and at the end it became very unhappy. I guess we got some funding from this foundation, as I mentioned, and then we found out that there are lots of restrictions. For example, how you write your report, and they want you to write the report a certain way. And so eventually we kind of really upset on this whole thing.
So there's been, there continues to be controversy within the scientific community over the effects of electromagnetic radiation. Right. But there's been a lot of studies, although not so many here in the U.S. In fact, actually, what has been the climate for studying the effects of electromagnetic radiation since you came out with your paper back in '94?
Oh, well, after 1994, there was, I think there's a kind of an effort for the industry to stop research in this area. And basically in the U.S. we don't have any research at all. And most of the research in, for example, cell phone studies either in Europe or in Far East countries, in Japan, China. So right now we are a third world country in this type of research. We are not doing any research at all. Even Canada has some research going on.
And what little research there would be in this country would come from being financed by the industry itself?
I don't think right now there's any industry funding
doing that.
but well, there is a NIH funded research going on right now on long-term exposure study.
Okay. And you said something interesting before we went on, that in fact, since the research has been cut off for this, since the funding for this research has been cut off for so long, that the scientists with expertise in this area have literally almost dried up in this country?
Yes. Well, these scientists either retire because there's no funding, or either move to another area that they can get funding. So they're basically out of the area. So it come up to the point is that if the U.S. government come up with some money to do this type of research, there's nobody to do it because people already left the field. So that is a big concern. So we may never be able to catch up with this type of research anymore.
And of the studies that have been done on the effects of electromagnetic radiation, what has been the general outcome of those in terms of whether they show health effects or not?
Mm-hmm. Now we have to separate this statement into two parts. One is biological effects, and the other one is health effects. Now you can have biological effects, but you may not have health effect. It may not cause the change in the physiology or biology of the after exposure may not lead to a hazardous health effect. So when you look at the study, for example, in the cell phone study, there are about 400 some studies on cell phone over the last 10 years, 15 years. And if you separate them, this type of the research involves many areas of biological responses. For example, how animals behave, learning, genetic effects, and immunological effects, like effects on embryo development, for example. Now you separate this like 400 or so papers into how many of them found reported effect and how many of them did not report effect, did not find effects. And they're about half and half. 50% show effect, 50% did not show any effect at all. Now this, you expect this type of thing to happen in biological research because you don't expect something to affect everything. So 50-50 is, I think, is a cause for concern. Because they did not say that there's no effect. This effect. Now, some of these effects can be health effects. For example, one example is there's a study in Greece, and they expose animals to this type of high-frequency radiation. And they found that after 7 generations, they cannot reproduce. So that is obviously a very concern of, it's a health effect.
And how do the studies fare when you consider the source of funding out of those same 400 studies?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting thing. That's I have some also separated the studies according to the sources of funding, whether the study funded by the industry or they're funded by independent, for example, from NIH, from independent sources, from the government, for example. And you find that then you separate again into effect versus no effect. And most of the study that were funded by the industry show no effect. It's about 30 to 70. 30 show effect, 70 did not show effect. Now, when you look at the other funding from studies that were funded by independent sources, and you find the ratio is opposite, 70 to 30. 70% found effect, 30% found no effect. Now, I was not the only one that showed this. There was actually a paper, peer-reviewed paper, published in a journal called Environmental Health Perspective in January 2007. And they also came up with the same conclusion, that the outcome of an experiment depends on who was funding the research.
So since that study has come out, there's been other studies that have been happening. You said that you continue to do research in this general field. Mm-hmm. Do you find that the studies that are coming out continue to raise significant questions about the health effects of electromagnetic radiation?
Right, yeah. Well, I think one thing that came up in the last 4 or 5 years is that there's several reports that, actually this is very interesting, because when they look at these are epidemiological studies, and they look at the cancer rate of people versus how long they use cell phones. And several papers came up with the conclusion that the cancer risk increased 2 to 3 times after 10 years of cell phone use, certain type of brain cancer. And they also, interesting, people use a cell phone, either use some of them will prefer use the left side, other people prefer to use the right side. And then you look at the location of the tumor versus the side that the phone will use, and there's a very good correlation. Now, but again, this is not, there are only several studies showing this type of connection. And 10 years of use increases cancer risk 2 to 3 times. But also there are also surveys that did not show any effect at all. So now this is surprising, because brain cancer, for example, take some type of brain cancer, usually takes longer than that to develop. And a 10-year is a very short latency period. And I was actually surprised to see that people found effects at 10 years.
Critics of your original study in '94 have stated that since that was done on like with an analog type signal where you consistently, bombarded an area with electromagnetic radiation versus the current cell phones that use a pulse.
Yeah, right.
Can you address that?
Well, we also use pulse too. There's also some differences that the frequency we use was different from the cell phone frequency. Now we use 2.4 gigahertz, which is what we use for the microwave oven. And the cell phone at that time used 800 megahertz, which is 3 times lower than what we use. So there was actually a critique that, well, we did not use the right frequency, and because the cell phone used lower frequency. But then there are also studies that show that it doesn't matter when you use. There's several studies that use a cell phone frequency, and they also found DNA damage. Now, right now, because the change in technology and the cell phone frequency is closer to what we used before. 2.1 gigahertz, we use 2.4 instead of 0.8 gigahertz used in the 90s. So I don't know how to answer your question until research is carried out. Now, and also this so-called on-off type of, you're right that we use a continuous exposure. That means the energy goes into the body continuously. But when you use a phone, it's intermittent. When you talk, the phone emits radiation. So it's on and off, depending on how frequently you speak into the phone, you talk into the phone. And actually, interestingly, some guy tried that type of so-called on-off intermittent exposure. and they actually found that the intermittent exposure has high effects, has a bigger effect than continuous exposure. So we don't know why, but that's actually in the 80s, several people found this type of effect too. That the on-off type, the pulsing effect is more pronounced than continuous exposure effect.
So based on your findings, do you use a cell phone?
I don't use a cell phone because I don't need a cell phone. So I don't use phone very often.
You're not a big phone fan, no matter what type of phone.
Yeah. So.
All right, but how about with those? How about with your family? Do you have any recommendations for them?
Yeah, my kids, well, they're grown up now. Because they use cell phone, they're in the 20s, and most of the time they will use a wire headset.
To get the phone away
from
the
phone
head.
Away from the head, yeah, because that's the most important organ.
We only have a few minutes left. I wanted you to briefly tell us about your work with artemisinin.
Sure. Well, this is actually unrelated, seemingly unrelated research. We have discovered this compound called artemisinin, which is isolated from wormwood, Artemisia. And this compound has been used in the last, since 1973 as an anti-malarial to treat. Right now, this is the drug of choice for treatment of malaria. And this compound forms free radical when it encounters an iron atom in the body. And the free radical, of course, kills cells, just like what we mentioned in the DNA study. And malaria has a lot of iron inside, and that's how it kills malaria parasites. Now, cancer cells have a lot of iron inside compared to normal cell. And it turns out that this compound is very effective against cancer, in killing cancer cells without killing normal cells. That makes it a very good chemotherapeutic agent because it only kills cancer, selectively kill cancer cells and not normal cells. And there's no side effects.
And I think you were telling me before, the current chemotherapy currently kills about, was it like one?
Well, one to four type of, 4 cancer cells will kill 1 normal cell. But the compound we have is 1 to 100. So 1 normal cell versus 100 cancer cells.
So this comes across as amazing to me. So and this is fairly, you discovered this and worked with this back about the same time you wrote the other paper, didn't you?
Yeah, we started the research in 1994, and it turns out that it was very difficult to get funding to do this type of research because it's a new type of discovery. But eventually we got quite a lot of funding to do the research on artemisinin and cancer treatment.
And the UW has supported that work, and so what's been the result of that?
Well, we have patents filed by UW on this type of compound, and most of the patents have been licensed out to companies. Okay. And so it would still take a long time to get this going.
But wouldn't you expect this to be more breaking news that this is available and it's a relatively, I mean, it's really inexpensive. You can go out and order it on the internet for $25
that has
a bottle.
Been reported by BBC. I was interviewed by BBC for half an hour on this compound many years ago, and it was also in a Time magazine. And the problem with this drug is that it's so cheap. And not too many companies are interested in developing drugs that are cheap. So what the patents we have are actually improved compounds, synthetic compounds that makes the they're more potent than the parent compound artemisinin.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. I still have a lot more questions. So I want to thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Oh, thank you.